Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's session. We are going to get started pretty much straight away because there are so many important things that we want to be talking about in these next 60 minutes. But really pleased that you're all able to join us today. Please do use the chat box to introduce yourself, say where you're from, the organisation that you work for. We've got lots of people joining us from around the world, so it'd be lovely to know where you're all from. Just to quickly introduce myself, I'm Becca Harvey. I am the head of community and engagement at Social Value International. I'm just going to do some very basic housekeeping and introduce this session. So just before we absolutely do get started, this session is being recorded. We've purposely chosen to use Zoom meetings rather than Zoom webinars because what we want to do is have throughout the whole of these months, have a really engaging conversation with people. And so we want to be able to see everyone's faces. But please do make sure that you are muted throughout the session so that we can hear the amazing insights that these panelists will be sharing, and ask any questions that you have in the chat box. But as I've sort of hinted at, this is a month of discussions, and it is a series of events that are taking place throughout the month, which is Beyond ESG month. So throughout this month of March, Social Value International, alongside our partners, will be hosting a series of events, discussions, blogs, thought leadership that's really trying to look at the current ESG agenda, understand what some of the challenges are that are faced by the ESG agenda, but more importantly, offer some practical solutions about how we can evolve the ESG agenda. We hope that by the end of this month, we will have some actions that people can take away, that we can do together, that we can collectively take forward. And we hope that we have a community of people who are really feeling empowered to take forward these conversations and to be able to make that change so that we can achieve sustainable development. We're only 8 days into the month and already we've had some fantastic conversations. This is the first event, but we've had several really fantastic blogs that have taken place. So do take a look on our website to read them. There's also been some great conversations that have happened on our social media channels and in our members area as well. But as you just know, I've just said we're 8 days into March, which of course means that today is International Women's Day. So happy International Women's Day, everybody. We will, of course, in this conversation and in all conversations that happen regarding the social value movement, ESG, sustainable development, be including gender within those conversations. But I just wanted to highlight, as well as the inclusion of gender in this discussion, what else Social Value International will be doing today and this week and throughout this month and always to achieve the aim of today's International Women's Day, which, if you don't know, is break the bias. So this week alone, we're going to be showcasing some of the amazing work that women leaders within our movement have done. Please do take a look on our Twitter for that, and you'll see the campaign where we're showcasing some of the amazing work of the women leaders within our movement and the work that they have done. There's also a blog that went up yesterday that is exploring why gender equity is important to ESG and the social value movement. So please do take a look at that. And as I've mentioned, this is a series of discussions and events. There will be several other events taking place throughout this month. And they will all have, as much as possible, gender equity along those panels. And I am really excited because throughout this month, we're going to be joined by some exceptional women leaders who I'm honoured to work with, but also incredibly excited to learn from. So yeah, really looking forward to this whole month, this discussion today. But I think it's only right that whilst this is exciting and this conversation is exciting, that we also take the time today to reflect on the humanitarian crisis that is unfolding in Ukraine. The situation that is happening there, as I'm sure is in the forefront of many of your minds today as we go into this conversation around social value, around sustainable development, as it's International Women's Day and we're celebrating the achievement and the lives of so many women and campaigning for change. The tragedy that's unfolding there and in all conflict situations across the world is in the forefront of our minds. And today, with it being International Women's Day, the lives of women and girls in conflict affected regions is very much at the centre of my mind, as I'm sure it is with all of you. And so just want to reflect that the social value movement is underpinned by social justice, and that includes paying respect, activism, doing as much as we can to respect and protect the victims of war. So as we go into this discussion today, let's also just have that in the back of our mind. But I will stop there and hand over to Ben, who is going to be moderating this discussion. Just as a final reminder before I do, this session is being recorded. The recording will be made available, but if you don't want to be on camera, just turn your camera off, excuse me, keep yourself on mute, and I hope you enjoy this discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Becca, and welcome everyone. My name's Ben, I'm Chief Exec of SVI. I also want to start with some thank yous to my team, Becca, for all the work you've done in setting up this session and the whole month, and Lucia and Heidi, new member of our team, to get everything in place for today. And of course, Paul, one of our panel members. Paul and Impak Finance have been instrumental in putting together not only this panel, but also some of the other sessions later. So thank you. We've got some great speakers, so we're going to hand over to them soon, but just briefly from me, what is today about? The title is ESG and the Social Value Movement. We're not going to get the answers today, but we want to lay out the issues and tease out, why is ESG becoming so relevant to the social value movement? Some of you might be new to SVI, and so you might be saying, well, what is this social value movement? Quite simply, we're a global network of people who imagine a world where decisions are made that optimize impacts on well-being, that reduce inequality and reduce the harm to the environment. And we all share a mission to change the way the world accounts for value. And since 2007, we have been setting standards for how to measure the impacts of our activities on people. Okay, so in the last 2 years, SVI membership has become even more diverse. It's always been a mixture of people from the public sector, private sector, civil society. But through COVID, the climate crisis, global recession, you know, it seems as the world is falling apart. Everyone's now saying, well, we need to change it. And I think the rise of ESG investing and ESG practice shows that the capital markets are also wanting to change the world. But what we need to understand is, how are they doing that? And are they trying to fix the world's problems by managing the impact they have on people and planet? Or actually, is ESG not about that, and it's about managing risks to financial returns? And so the words we use are really important, and that's what we want to start to unpick this month. So the panel's been brought together to bring some of these different perspectives to unpick the issues. And so without further ado, I want to hand over to each panel member to introduce themselves. I'll ask you to be succinct, give yourself 2 minutes, tell the audience what your role is and what perspective are you bringing to this conversation today. How has ESG investing and ESG reporting affected your work in the last 2 years? And I'm going to hand first over to Bonnie.
Hi everyone, so my name is Bonnie Chu. I'm the Managing Director of the Social Investment Consultancy. I see my colleagues Gabrielle and Fabienne here on this call as well, so just want to say hi to them. So my entry into this conversation is in this space. I think we talk a lot about the spectrum of capital, and on one hand kind of social impact, on the other hand financial returns. And I find that quite helpful, because when we have discussion around ESG or social impact, everyone's coming at it at slightly different points, and that's just a helpful visualization to look at where our entry point is. And my own entry point is really from the end of social impact, that I have a lot of experience working in social impact measurement and management. Know SVI for a very long time, because I was trained in SROI many years ago, and some of my work would include evaluating impact of girls' education programs in sub-Saharan Africa to impact of climate change programs or campaigns in the UK. So that's really kind of as social impact as deep you can get. We also at the Social Investment Consultancy work on impact investing strategies, especially to help organizations embed diversity, equity, and inclusion in their impact investing strategies. And I'll say the past 2 years with COVID, with Black Lives Matter, suddenly our work's become much more interesting to a lot more people. You know, we used to be this niche consultancy that only foundations or social enterprises or charities work with. But now we see much more interest from investors that are branding themselves as ESG, who want to learn about social impact, because ultimately that's impact measurement and management is what really differentiates mainstream investments from ESG investments and impact investments. But at the same time, also very little has changed about my work, because I think a lot of the rhetoric remains as rhetoric, and there's not enough action from investors, from mainstream players to dedicate resources around impact. And I also mentioned Black Lives Matter because I think it's really important that ESG is talked about, but at the same time, there's a lot more movement around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that we do see the two areas merging. So I'll stop there and we'll pick up, I'm sure. And of course, gender being a theme around EDI that I really want to advocate for. So over back to Ben.
Brilliant. Thank you, Bonnie. That's excellent perspective, bringing in that kind of focus on social impact measurement. Look forward to hearing more of your thoughts. Yelena, can I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, hi everyone. So thank you, Ben. And my name is Yelena. I work now at Antos Fund and Asset Management as a director of responsible investment, which if we follow Bonnie's sort of explanation of the spectrum of capital, or where it goes from traditional finance to really the social and the impact and philanthropy in a way. We are somewhere in the middle. So I've spent about 10 years of my working life in the past, so the past 10 years working in responsible investment. And this is basically somewhere where you go from traditional finance towards impact, with looking really at, if you will, ESG. But I want to say in the past 10 years when I started, it was very much about the impact and sustainability. And it was very much about that ethical part. So it was really beyond ESG, what we call today. But then somewhere in the middle of that growth, it changed because we needed to sort of make sure that the ESG has a business case. So there is a business case of why investors should take into account ESG. And this is where that, in my experience, that got lost a little bit, really the impact to people and the impact to the world. And now I'm happy to see that in the last, let's say, 3 to 5 years, or I think I would say in the past 3 years, especially with COVID, and I think that impact to people and impact to the world and the double materiality is coming back. And this is something that we've been trying to really explain to many managers over the years. And now it's really picking up. And I'm quite excited that this is now happening, even though, as Bonnie said, there is still a lot of work to be done. So this is where I sort of work in that space, and I'll leave it here and then happy to talk further.
Yeah, Yelena, thank you. You win the prize for the first person to mention double materiality, and that's fantastic.
Is that a bingo?
That's the bingo. One of the important topics for the discussion. Fabian, you next, please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I've been working in the fintech space for about 20 years for risk management and index provider companies. So the big names of today, the MSCI of this world, Axioma, Stocks, Contigo, Deutsche Börse, and the ESG journey for me started in 2007 when we made the acquisition of Institutional Shareholder Services, which was one of the very first companies to actually gather ESG data, well, data flagged as ESG data at that time. My journey has been simple. Been trying to produce software which were utilizing this data and helping for asset allocation in general, and clearly for the creation of indices. So I saw this industry developing. I saw what I would call ESG 1.0 now, ESG 2.0, maybe ESG 3.0, where we can discuss about it. But in my view, it's mainly about the type of data being collected, how it got collected, more than the way it's been used. And I switched from being one of the creators of these data sets and the way they were being used to venture capital about 3 years ago, where now I'm actually trying to change the world in a different way, where I'm trying to help companies which are impact driven in a very hands-on fashion. And this goes from microfunding in emerging markets to helping companies in our developed countries, in early stage companies, helping them present themselves, helping them setting up goals for impact and trying to set their strategies such that those goals are still being met despite the search for returns.
Great. So you've gone from being sort of, excuse my crude terms, collecting data to support ESG to actually actively supporting impact-focused funds.
That's exactly it, yes.
Okay, awesome, great. And last but by no means least, Paul, please introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. I'm a tech entrepreneur, and I've created a co-founded Impact in 2017. And our mission, our impact mission, is to bring more quality in the impact assessment to the financial world. In a nutshell, we're the first company that has productized the impact management project framework. And we produce impact assessments, impact statements that has the highest quality standards. And I believe that today, if we are really exploring to change the financial sector, well, the foundation, the 101 basis of any change management is always to have the clearest picture possible to start with. And to have that clear picture, we need to have that clear picture from a real impact assessment of any asset we're investing or we're lending to. And that's where it's kind of a funny world where the financial sector has always been saying that they were very high level professional and always did some serious work about analysis. And it's true on the financial side, but it's so not true on the ESG side. They accept to work with bad quality data, incomplete data, not double materiality analysis, non-comparable, non-transparent, and I'm going to go on and so on, which creates these crises in the ESG world, which as long as we do not have the same rigor that we have on the financial side to have audited impact statements with a comparable and with a standard that is high quality, and I insist, with a double materiality approach, we are just doomed to just repeat things that we put a lot of effort with no results. Look at the last report that we just had last week. That's not what I call positive results. And collectively, if we want to bring and get to an impact economy where every financial and economic agent will take a decision not only on financial aspects, but on impact aspects, we need to have the right data. That's our mission at Impact Finance.
Thank you, Paul. And I think I should just pick on you there actually and say, as you're the second person to mention double materiality, what does it mean? Because most people here probably do, but it has been mentioned twice now. So do you want to have a go at sort of explaining what that means, Paul?
Yes. I think the simple materiality is to look at what are the effect of environment in social aspects on your investment. That's a simple length. And the double materiality is to change point of view and look at this organization activities. What are the effect of these activities on the environment and the social elements? And that's the double materiality said very simply. And without these 2 points, we're just doing the same as the last 75 years with the Chicago School. And we really need to have these double lengths to protect our investment. Yes, absolutely. But also to protect and to create, not only to mitigate the negative impacts that we've created over the 75 years or 100 years, but we also need to generate in our model positive impact, which is 2 different stories of the same coin.
Perfect. Okay, so we've really learned there that we've got some different people coming from different perspectives, and this idea of double materiality means that SVI's community is really relevant now, because we are a community that have been measuring the impacts of an organization on people. So if ESG is to evolve that way, as a community, the social value movement has a lot to give. Okay. Bonnie, I'm going to come back to you. And the next question is, what would you say are the key defining characteristics of ESG? And I'm going to throw in, do you see that ESG as a risk or an opportunity?
Thank you, Ben. It's a very difficult question for me to answer, because I myself don't really know what the defining characteristics really are of ESG investments. Of course, there is the textbook answer that you can get from all the different sustainability standards, whether that's GRI or SVI, of course, has its own standards. So you have all those kind of textbook standards, but I think we don't really know as a wider community what those defining characteristics are. And I think a case in point is, and this anecdote, it came from our training, the training Ben and I collaborated on for SDG impact standards, and we can talk more about that later on. But while we were doing the training, we found an example of European ESG assets being shrunk by $2 trillion after the greenwashing rules have been implemented by the EU. So I think that it's just a perfect example that we have those defining characteristics, but actually we see a lot of greenwashing, a lot of impact washing, and there's not a clear sense what those defining characteristics really are. And I come from a much more social impact background, so I don't want to kind of pretend to be an expert on this, but one thing that we're trying to do with SVI is to help with the implementation of the SDG impact standard. So investors can sign up or can sign up to the SDG impact standards in the sense that you can apply that to your investments, and it is a way for you to show that you're really contributing positively to the SDGs. I think SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are used by a lot of investors, but they are often just used with this logo that they have on the impact reports, but not really with the rigor on how to measure contributing positively. So I think this is one example, using those standards like the SDG impact standards that could help characterize whether an investor is really contributing positively to the SDGs. And with my remarks, therefore, I think ESG currently is presenting more of a risk, because it is how it's implemented is making people very cautious as well as skeptical of this impact thesis, this sustainability thesis. And it's very easy to lose trust, especially among people who are not actively working in this space, the people who are just investing their pension funds, their own pensions into these investments. And I fear that we'll be kind of going into that path where ESG doesn't mean anything to anyone. But there is an opportunity if we have more conversations like this, if we really take the next 2 years, I think, with this momentum and interest in ESG, to turn it around to something that is truly contributing positively, to your point on double materiality. So yeah, over to other panelists who probably have more eloquent things to say on defining characteristics specifically.
I think that's brilliant, Bonnie. Thank you. Yelena, I'll ask you to build on top of Bonnie.
Well, I don't know if I'll be more eloquent. That was really nicely said. But I do have a different perspective, because I do come from the ESG side, if you will, even though I never want to call it ESG, because for me, ESG is just one tool. So I call ESG, for me, stands for ESG Integration, which means basically integrating environmental, social, and governance issues into the investment process. And this is just one thing that you can do as an investor if you want to be a responsible investor. And the other things that you can and should be doing is also looking into the negative impact of these ESG issues on the world. And you should also be looking into stewardship. So for me, it's much broader, but I can understand that from people that are not part of the industry, and we have developed perhaps because the world is complicated, but we have developed a complicated way to make sense of it and to bring it into the investments. And it has created, in that sense, risks of greenwashing. And I think risks of people feeling too quickly that they understand everything there is to know about ESG and just run with it. And then I think this is it's just like any other profession. If you are, if your pension fund and your investor is investing, you as a single person, you don't know all the details on the financial part either, but you trust that and you check and you trust. You don't just trust, you also check that they're doing the right thing. I think maybe at some point we need to trust that not everybody understands ESG, but that it's also something that the professionals can deal with. But then we as professionals, we need to also learn how to communicate it better and how to make it more acceptable and more understandable, and that people can actually feel more in control on what it is and what it isn't. So in a way, I guess I want to say it's that ESG can be a risk, can be an opportunity. I think what it is at the moment is it brought us to this level where we can actually discuss how we can make it more to work. We shouldn't, we shouldn't throw out all the work that we have done in the past 10 years, because I think we have come to this place where so many people are talking about it. And I think now it's an opportunity to improve, to put better definitions, to put better reporting and come close to the real world. Because what we really want to check is what is the impact of all this that we're doing on the real world, in the real economy, in the world, and the people, etc.
Perfect. Thanks, Jelena. So there's obviously a number of risks, but definitely clear opportunities emerging. Fabian, what are your views on this?
First, it's very, very difficult to actually point out any characteristics, right? I actually don't quite know what ESG is today in people's mind. I think it started as a very well-defined concept, which was completely inward focused on companies, right? How a company itself could operate, could avoid risks, and risk of bad governance, risk of the environmental impact the company could face in case of changes. So that was a very clear concept, but it really got out of hand, right? And I think it's out of control. And it's not a bad thing at all. It's just that this is a concept which is now taken by everyone. It's in every single article that you can read, actually. It's not just in finance, it's about everything. People are using ESG in many different contexts. And I completely agree with Jelena. I think we need to clarify. I'm always actually feeling uncomfortable talking about ESG. Should I talk about sustainability? Should I talk about impact, positive impact, negative impact? Does negative impact mean ESG? For everyone, it's going to be very different. And if I could, I would just walk away from many of these words and come up with new words. Removing a lot of acronyms as well, because it's fairly messy with all the various standards, committees. They are looking at different parts of the ESG problem in general. So it's very, very difficult. But I think what became super interesting is that this switch from an inward focused problems to an outward focused problem, thanks to the public being aware of ESG, right? And I think that's the main thing that I could see changing the past three years, maybe a bit more than that, where it became, thanks to climate changes, actually, it became a concern for everyone. If you talk, if I talk to my parents, to my family about ESG, none of them is in finance, but they will all think about decarbonization now. That's the way they think about it. They associate it to this, and our companies are actually helping for that or not, right? So I think it's super interesting that it's evolving and that it becomes something that everyone owns, because it cannot be just for finance. It cannot be just for a few corporates. And I think that there's a huge opportunity, because so far it's been mainly focused on also the public companies, the big companies, and now those are operating. But it's getting now across all industries, across all organizations, in small companies. It's a concern everywhere, and it becomes something which also attracts talent in companies. So it's very interesting. I think there are a lot of opportunities there. But as of today, it's still, to me, something which is first and foremost for risk management. I see it in the asset management industry being used in 3 ways. For defining investment universes, that would be closer to what I think Ian and I would talk about in terms of responsible investments, where you really define which companies are not worth investing in, not worth from a financial perspective, but worth from a social perspective. Then I see it being used for compliance purposes, pure compliance, and this is more about, you know, avoiding to have clients, avoiding to have suppliers who might be also suppliers of weapons, right? Or connected to there. So that's really about high-level risk management, corporate risk management, and then clearly in portfolio allocation, and that's where the risk management I'm coming from is still playing a role. So how do you use data? How do you use scores such as impact score produced by Pulse company? How do you use those scores to construct portfolios? And I think that the current industry is at a turning point. I think it has finally realized that you know, the growing number of ETFs and inflows in the financial sector on the basis of ESG is not bringing the value that investors in these vehicles thought it would bring. So this is a point where most of firms are now trying to find social signals and value, impact value in ESG data, and they struggle. None of them believe in any of the traditional ESG data sets nowadays, which creates a huge opportunity.
Thanks, Fabian. I'm fascinated by this idea that up until a few years ago, ESG was actually quite clearly very much about managing risk, and only in the last few years it's got confused. And so, Paul, what do you think about this confusion? Bonnie spoke about the SDGs. The IFRS have introduced the International Sustainability Standard Board. Sustainability and ESG is now become, what's the, you know, almost the same thing. But is this where the confusion lies? And what do you think are the key characteristics and risks opportunity?
Well, I come back from to the point is if we really are serious about change management in not only in finance, but you always are in search of what is the most accurate data to give the best picture of a situation. So when we talk about environment and social impact and governance, which is the impact governance, processes in place that manages the impact, I think that if we're serious about it, we need to invest and do our homework. And yes, there's a lot of acronyms, a lot of TSFD, SFDR, EBA, ESMA, and which is a good news and an opportunity. But at the basis, we need, as we did in the financial sectors that started in the United States in 1920, when they started with a gap to standardize the financial statements, we need to be logic about how we need to have these data. And the logic approach is, if a set of data doesn't look at the entire activities of an organization, we want to understand where they stand in terms of how they mitigate their negative impact. And if they do generate positive impact, well, we should ask ourselves questions of the seriousness of the process. So it's all about, I'm a civil engineer and I like the logic stuff. And when I want to take a serious decision, I seek the best data. And today, the problem with the ESG, which as Fabien did describe it, started as only a risk management of your investment. is now today how an organization impacts, yes, and has an impact on on the financial risk, but has an impact on environment and social. Well, we need to seek and to do our homework and not to be lazy. And the lazy approach is to simply do what was done short term and say we simply do not invest in oil factories. We invest in health. That's a lazy approach. The real approach is really to seek and to whatever the ESG or the data comes from. Ask yourself, do I take a decision based on qualitative data, quantitative and qualitative and other type of data, but in terms of quality, and is it complete, and is it comparable, and can I take a real decision on it? And that's where I think that we confuse impact investing and impact analysis and impact assessment. And I think that today ESG, as is it known today, is a risk. And we see it with the ISSB, where they're focusing on the financial risk without taking this other materiality approach, which is super important if we really genuinely want to change our world. And I think that an impact assessment will give based on the best practices out there, will give the right data for an investment to or do a pure play impact investment or transformation, or at least choose a thematic that avoids pitfalls of not overseeing other aspects of their theme. If I'm investing in water and I don't look at the social aspects, I'm doing a basic mistake. And that's what I think that the risk about ESG is a risk, but as Fabien said, is a huge opportunity, because now everybody's talking about it. That's a huge good news. And as Jelena said, yes, without, and I always say that to my fellow in the impact in the ESG world, which I call the first generation ESG rating agencies, I said I wouldn't exist as a second generation impact assessment company if you weren't there to do all the work and to build all the standard setters such as ISSB, SASB, and go on and so forth. So I'm quite confident that that if we continue at the pace we continue with the initiatives such as ISSB, even though there's a huge risk of not coming with the double materiality, but it's a first level that we will be able to work on and to transform. But for me, regulators and standards is one thing, but the practitioners, they have the choice and the obligation to be serious about what they do. And to be serious about what you do, seek and invest in quality data. That's my point of view.
Well, that's great. So from all of those responses, I'm hearing actually risk is quite high, but obviously opportunity because of the focus on ESG, and we seem to be at a crossroads, and the third generation, if you like, Paul, is what we need to look at now. So questions are coming in from the audience, but a couple more from me. How would you like to see ESG practice evolve over the next 2 to 5 years? And is there anything you're doing in particular that you want to share with the audience? So back to you, Bonnie.
Well, Paul has unmuted. Why don't he go first so we spice it up a bit?
Okay, we'll go the other way. Okay, Paul, you, and then we'll go back through the panelists.
Yeah, well, I believe again in change management theory and related to impact theory of change, where I think that to evolve seriously, we need to apply the same rules that we apply to the financial sector. So there's no banker, there's no lender, there's no investor that would look at an opportunity without having audited financial statement based on the IFRS. They wouldn't even look at it. They wouldn't even consider. So we need to put the same seriousness on the extra financial world and expect to have an impact assessment audited by a recognized third party based on a comparable and transparent standard worldwide that looks at the entire activities of the organization, look at the double materiality, of the negative impact and the processes that put in place to mitigate them, and looks at the indicators in such a way that they are contextualized, because an absolute number means absolutely nothing. And that does the same process on the positive impact with a common language. And today the common language is the SDGs. But when I think that that's where ESG needs to land, and this would apply to any type of financial products. And there's some banks, and the good news is there's some big banks and big asset managers that today embraces this huge financial sector transformation and says that 100% of our businesses, of our business opportunity, of our business process will include from now on impact data in their business process. Should we develop some sustainable products or not? Should we have some impact products or not? In the basis of our business process, decision process, we'll now integrate not only audited financial statements, but also audited impact statements. And that's a good news. And that's where I see things moving. And yes, the regulators are late. They just take one piece of it, like European taxonomy. SFDR is very basic. But the good news is that if the regulators are there, it's just the start of the real change.
I love that. Anything about assurance, you're speaking to the converted. I'm a big fan of audit, so thank you, Paul. Love that. Fabian, what do you see as the important evolution in the next 2 to 5 years?
I think I'm in complete agreement with Paul. The reporting is evolving. It's not widely adopted yet, but as Paul mentioned, some institutions are looking for really way better data, a lot more granular. I think it's also one of the problem with positive impact or social value is that actually it's much harder to reduce it to a few numbers because it differs so much depending on the type of business a company is in, and also the stage of the company. So it's very different whether a company is a 20 people company or a 20,000 people company. The impact is completely different at all scales, but also in the way they operate, the impact and social value is going to be very different. So the reporting is clearly and very detailed. Audited reporting is very clearly a need, and I see the direction there. I draw to some extent the parallel with what credit markets have seen and the way we thought about credit more than 20 years ago. It was pretty much the same type of problems. And as Paul mentioned, until the regulators really chime in and impose some standards, it's been very difficult. However, there's always a chicken and egg situation here where regulators have issues because they don't have enough data. They don't know which data can be produced. They don't know which data they can impose regulations from. And I think that we need to show a bit more the way. I think what Paul is doing with companies one way. I'm seeing other companies which are also proposing complementary approaches, trying to assess the impact of the product themselves or the company in a very different fashion, in a very detailed fashion as well. And I think that's where the world is going. That's where I was saying I see an opportunity in the fact that the public owns the ESG concept, and what it creates is a demand for understanding how we consume today, what's the value in everything that we consume, what the impact in everything that we consume. And I think that more and more disclosures will be produced, not just accounting disclosures, not just purely financial related disclosures, but disclosure to the public, which will actually, which are going to drive adoption of companies' products, which are going to drive the growth of companies, which are going to drive, at the end of the day, behaviors of those companies. And as far as I'm concerned, that's one of the reasons why I ended up creating an impact-driven fund, is that I do believe that companies which will be able to produce very clear, auditable. I'm absolutely with you on this auditable impact reports, and which will be able to communicate them not only to investors, not only to financial markets, but to the public in a very clear manner. Those will actually drive the change. They will get higher valuation. So that's going to be when actually financial markets are going to pick up and adopt those practices. And I think that's where the chain is going to move. The public is going to create the winners by consuming, by getting closer, by adopting brands and companies which are actually a lot more active in disclosure, a lot more rigorous in disclosure, and which help them to understand. And I think that's what's going to drive finance to adopt. And in finance, you know, there's a food chain. It's going to take some time. It's a food chain of financing of companies. And I think that it's going to take 5 to 10 years to transform this industry. But I do believe that in 10 years from now, you know, the alignment of whatever ESG or the successor of the ESG will become in terms of naming will come back to the source of what Jelena was doing with responsible investment from the ground up, right?
Brilliant. Jelena, tell us what you think needs to happen to accelerate Fabian's 5 to 10 year view for those impatient like me.
Yeah, well, no, but I think I do agree also with Paul and Fabian, and I think the reporting part is definitely something that is developing. I think for investments, and I think in general, it's not, so the reporting is just the first step, but learning how to use the data, learning what to do with it, getting the capacity that you have the people to actually do something with the reports that you're getting. I think that's something that is still in development. So I call that the monitoring, let's say, part. So because now we are all asking about more transparency, more data, more reporting. We start getting that data. What do? We don't have enough people. We just have to start hiring people, hire people for data management, hire people to make sense for that. How do you translate that now in the investment decision? And I think we do that to a certain degree, but I think this will accelerate much more in the next, in the coming years. Which hopefully will bring indeed that clarity on the differentiation between ESG and impact, let's say, to call it in a very simple way. The way we look at the portfolios and how we are trying to make sense of this is basically you look at it in 3 ways. What do you not want in your portfolios? This is, if you will, exclusions, values. This is very much related to values and perhaps some risk, but mostly it's values. Then what you really want in your portfolio. So this is impact. This is where everybody now wants to invest in more impactful companies, more sustainable companies. And what do you want to have? What do you do with everything in the middle? Because there is a big part in the middle. And this is where we see that the discussion between ESG as a risk and ESG as an impact, and making sure that that gray part is actually something that moves towards a better, towards improvement itself. And I think this will become more strong as well in the coming years.
Love that. So more professionalization, investment in people, education, that will lead to behavior change, as Fabian and Paul said.
Exactly.
Data, more reporting. Bonnie, over to you then.
Well, I won't repeat what my panelists said. I think they are all really valid points. And on the point of audit, if you think about how in the financial markets with all these very robust standards that have been implemented for almost a century now, we still have big audit scandals of car companies trying to cheat, right? So you can just imagine currently without, it's like the Wild West. People are claiming ESG and they're just running wild. And there's a lot of people making lots of money from this. It's also a bit like a gold rush currently. People see, oh, with ESG, if I tag my fund as ESG, that I'm going to make money. If my company says I'm contributing to decarbonization, I get much more higher valuation. So I think we need to be, I would like us to be more honest about some of the downfalls of the current ESG space, which I feel right now we're doing. We're quite honest about its shortcomings, and reconciling with that is, I think, the first point that I'll see evolution to take place. I think secondly, there's now a lot of demand for ESG professionals, and it's a great opportunity to develop the right kind of talent. And I think that's where organizations like SVI, all the trainings you've done, all the certification, having this network of community of practices, that's really important, because we can actually create and cultivate a new generation of professionals that are working in ESG, working in financial markets, and not repeat some of the same mistakes we see in the mainstream financial space. So I think that's another thing I really want to see evolution of. And CFA now has the ESG certificate, but is that good enough? Is that the kind of ESG that we want to see? And thirdly, I would say, and I'll end here, ESG is still very separate. You will have people who specialize in the E and the S and the G, but actually they're all interlinked. And my perspective of this is through diversity, equity, and inclusion. I want to highlight that I forgot to say I do write, I'm a senior contributor on Forbes, and I write a lot about these issues. I've just written about the Principles for Responsible Investment, UNPRI. They published a report on DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion, which was very good for investors to think about how to integrate this into their strategy. And DEI actually has implications on E, S, and G, because with E, you need to talk about just transition. You can't just think of decarbonization without impact on people. And with governance, you can't think of bad governance and not think about how it actually impacts E and S. And on International Women's Day, there was a report that talks about how more women on boards, companies with more women on boards, actually they have more positive environmental impact as well. So that's just, so you see the linkages, and I hope that as our practice evolves and we're more mature in thinking about this, that we don't see them as separate and we take a much more integrated approach, and hopefully then people will find it less overwhelming, because after all, everything is linked and it's all about making the world a better place through companies.
Well, thanks, Bonnie. And the more I listen, it seems like SVI as a community of practitioners with a track record of bringing people together and harmonizing and evolving has an important role to play in this space. So we've got a bit of time for questions from the audience. I'm going to put two to the panel, two questions at the same time, and then we'll dip into some more. First one is, as it is International Women's Day, how does ESG reporting or investing need to evolve to tackle gender inequality, which we know is even harder to achieve as a result of the pandemic? So that's the first question. And the second question is looking at small to medium-sized companies, perhaps ones that isn't listed on the stock exchange. What are the benefits of these SMEs putting effort into social value measurement or external ESG reporting? And when does the effort become worth it for these SMEs? So two questions. Who wants to go first?
I can start.
Thanks,
they're great questions. They're not easy. That's why I was hesitant. I think the first one about gender inequality, I think it's a topic that actually is really everywhere in the past 2 years. I think it's one of the topics next to climate change that has really gotten sort of quite attention in the investment world, let's say. We are basically also asking on that to our external managers, and we are really engaging on the topic ourselves as well. For me, it's a broader topic. I think human rights as a topic is very important, and I think that's also something I didn't mention, but I think in the next couple of years, I'm hoping, and I think, but I also hope that it will become really much bigger, because we are trying to really make it happen for the past 70 years since the Human Rights Declaration, but it's still, lagging behind the topic and like climate, whereas it's a topic that really goes across all the ESG and all the SDGs in that sense as well. So yes, diversity and inclusion, I think, is very important and is high on the agenda. And for the other one, I don't have so much experience for small and unlisted companies, but from my engagement experience and from my sort of instinct is that if you ask the question, when is it going to start becoming sort of commercially viable, I think, or was that the question? I think I think the value also is in the process. I think you have to make the question broader and think about that the value is also in the process, which hopefully will bring you a lot of insights in how to build your business in a more sustainable way. I think that ESG, there is a lot of discussions, but I think that ESG doesn't always lead to better return. It's not always a win. But I think, at least in the short term, but I think in the long term, it does create for a more sustainable and a business that actually really will be set up for success. So yes, I think that would be my answer.
If I can jump in very quickly, sorry, mindful of time, just 1 minute. On the topic of gender equality, I think ESG reporting really needs to start collecting gender disaggregated data, full stop. I'm on the committee of Gender Benchmark, which belongs to World Benchmarking Alliance. We looked at 25 top apparel companies. None of them actually collects gender disaggregated data that they report publicly. So that's one big problem. I think second, on the point of materiality, gender equality should always be considered material alongside climate, alongside human rights. So if we can get there, I think we'll be in a much better place to achieve gender equality. Over to Paul.
Maybe I'll chime in on the second part on the SMEs, and it's related to another question I saw actually around how do we quadruple the bottom line for getting market acceptance of the costs related to be sustainable. And I think that it's highly related to SMEs as well. I think that I'm a technologist at heart, and I think we saw the same issue with technology 25 years ago, even 15 years ago still, where everyone was thinking about change in technology, adoption of new technology as a big cost. Most of the companies were seeing it that way. The accountants were seeing it that way. And actually it has prevented faster adoption. It has prevented faster change and more technology being brought into particular industries. I think that it's pretty much the same issue with ESG and positive impact. I think that we should be very careful not to think about it as a bottom line problem for companies. I strongly believe that it's a top line issue, and that's the way we're going to drive faster adoption. That's the way we're going to drive faster change. It's about revenues that companies will be making. I think a small company will actually go faster in reaching its public, it's reaching to its client, if it can demonstrate that it has a positive impact. Because we all starve for that. At the end of the day, I think we're all aware and pretty much starve for it. We want to have impact, and really we should be super careful not to make it a bottom line problem. So I would invite, if I could, all the accountants working on this, not to look at it from purely a cost perspective. Yes, it costs money. It costs money to be more sustainable as of today. But the quicker we go about it, the less those costs will be. Exactly. So
thank you, Fabien. That's absolutely brilliant. And last word to Paul. Over to you.
I totally agree with Bonnie about the first question. It's a question of making it a habit of collecting the right data. That always comes back to the data. And the second question about small businesses, we started our impact assessment with small businesses. And it's not a question if it needs to be done one day, it will be. It's like internet. When I started internet in 95, the question was similar to what Fabien was talking about. Do we ask ourselves if we need to integrate the internet in our processes today? No, we wouldn't even exist as a company. The same will be about impact transformation and impact extra financial measurement. And smaller the better, because you can incorporate right away in your change management, in your objectives, in your processes, the right indicators of the right processes to be there instead of investing heavily when you'll need and have no choice in 5 years. So that's exactly what I think.
Do it now.
Similar to Fabrice.
Is what
Yeah,
Paul says. Do it now. Yeah. Don't delay.
Exactly.
Well, look, sorry to cut you off. I could listen to you all speak more. Bonnie's already had to jump. It's gone the hour. Becca, do you want to say some final words just to wrap things up?
Thank you, Ben, and thank you to all of the panelists. That was so interesting. I've actually been taking some notes and we'll be sharing a follow-on blog with you all in the coming day or so. But yeah, just a huge thank you to the panelists and to everybody for joining us. Please do take a look at the SVI website. As you said, we do have a series of discussions taking place through this month. There's a couple next week, another week after, culminating in a panel, a half-day summit on the 29th of March. So it's going to be a really fantastic jam-packed month of discussion. So please do participate as much as you can. But until then, thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate you giving up your valuable time to this discussion and look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you all.
Thank you for the
Thanks,
invite.
everyone.